Hello everyone, and welcome to this episode of the Coaching Outdoors podcast. We're in season 3, which is our international season, and we are being joined by a wonderful guest from Austria. Gerdi, could you introduce yourself to our listeners and our watchers?
Wow. Well, first of all, thank you for having me. I'm Gerdi. I'm Dutch. I live in Austria. And I moved there after I left my career in project management and consultancy because I wanted to live among mountains. And I also wanted to leave that work behind because it just wasn't me. So I started out as a mountain hiking guide, did some other stuff next to it. I still am a mountain hiking guide and combine it with coaching and ski instructing and whatever else enables me to keep on living in the mountains.
And I have to say, for our listeners who can't see, you have got an absolutely beautiful backdrop, which is a photo that you took. You know where exactly it was.
This is, you are looking at the summit of Ortler. That used to be the highest mountain of Austria before the end of the First World War, when part of Austria, part of Tyrol was given to Italy. So this is South Tyrol, where I guided a trek earlier this year.
Beautiful, thank you.
Yeah.
Interesting bit of context, bit of history, and beautiful part of the world. So we'd just like to kind of kickstart with a question that we ask everybody, and it's kind of taking us back into your childhood. And it would be great to know what your earliest memory of being outdoors is, and why do you enjoy being outside so much?
Well, I've listened to previous episodes of your podcast, and I was prepared for this question because I had to give it a bit of thought. And there's two things that come up, really. When I was a little girl, we lived in a very small village where there was basically no car traffic. So we were allowed to just roam around the village all over the place. But we had what in my, what was I, 3, 4, 5-year-old mind was a huge forest at the back of our house. And we just used to play there all the time with friends from the neighborhood and catch spiders and caterpillars and those kinds of things. When I went back years later, I found it was a minuscule strip of trees and bushes. But, you know, when you're a kid, everything seems to be big. And the other thing that came to my mind was there was a big pond in the middle of the village, and my dad was a fanatical ice skater. And back then we still had proper winters where ponds and canals would freeze over. And I'm Dutch, so you know, ice skating is our national sport. And I must have been 3 or something when he put me on small wooden skates for the first time, and I can still remember that. And have, you know, being taken onto that pond and him trying to teach me how to skate before I could basically, you know, walk properly. So those are my first memories. And I actually lost contact with nature for a while, especially when I was working in corporate. And that I gradually got ill while working in corporate. And it was only when I had the good luck to have a physician that said, you just have to go outside a lot, you know, don't sweat it. I'm not going to prescribe you any medication, just go outside. That's when I remembered, when my body remembered, that's really where I want to be, where I need to be healthy, to feel good, and to spend as much time as possible.
There's some really great things echoed there in sort of my experience as well. Not the ice skating. I've never been very good at ice skating, but the moving away from the corporate world and wanting to find the mountains. And my husband and I both jokingly said when we decided to move to Scotland, we wanted to be able to look out of the window and see mountains, trees, and water. And that's pretty much what we see as well up here in Scotland. And it's fascinating as well that you mentioned there about your doctors, you know, prescribing just being outdoors.
Yeah,
I had the similar experience. I had a doctor I had a vitamin D deficiency as an adult, which I think a lot of us adults do have if we work in the corporate world without really realizing it. and he just prescribed me daylight. He said, just go outside, which obviously we now do, which is wonderful. It would be lovely to hear a little bit more about your backstory and how you've gone from that corporate world and almost kind of forgetting or losing contact with nature into the wonderful work that you do now, being the outdoor person that you are. And obviously you've got quite a few strands of your outdoor businesses, but what's the backstory? How did you move from one to the other?
Oh, that's a really good question, because what happened was what happens to so many of us. You go to uni or you study some kind of subject, and then by the time you're finished, maybe not even having chosen something that you really love, you're like, well, I might as well go to work and figure it out while I'm working. So that's how I started in my career. And then 20 years later, I lifted my head from the desk and looked out the window, and I was like, what happened? What I did was, when that doctor did prescribe me a lot of outdoor time, I finally got myself a dog, which was something that I always wanted to have when I was a little girl. Never did, not even as an adult, because it was like, I don't have time for this. I'm working 40 to 80 hours a week. Where's a dog going to fit in? And I decided to turn it around and just get a dog and make sure that he fitted into my life and just change the way I worked. What I did is I went on holiday to Austria to hike in the mountains, because it's a very dog-friendly country. When you go on holiday there, you can bring your dog, no problem. And I was hiking these mountains, and I can remember the exact moment and the exact place when I came around the corner and felt completely at home. I was walking somewhere high up on a mountain, and my whole body knew, like you sometimes have, that you are where you're supposed to be and you're doing what you're supposed to be doing. And that feeling never left me. So I went back home, back to the Netherlands, spent about 4 years thinking about how can I move to Austria? What can I do there? In the meantime, I trained as a mountain hiking guide, or a mountain leader is what you call it in the UK. And after 4 years, it was just like, I'm going to sell everything that I have in the Netherlands, and I'm just going to go and see what happens. So that's how I ended up in the mountains. And that's basically where I stayed. And the only thing I know for sure is that I want to live among mountains, and how I do that is up to fate and to me and to whatever else happens.
And there definitely seems to be a theme of dog appreciation going on in our last couple of interviews, and actually how our four-legged friends can just give us a real different perspective on life and work. Yeah. And how, I don't know, I've got my little hashtag be more dog at the moment. And, I've got a 6-month-old puppy, and I sometimes look at my schedule and I'm like, how am I fitting dog around schedule? And then it's a lesson back. Schedule your day more kindly. Like, if it's not working for the dog and taking him out, then how is it working for you? So no, it's really interesting, kind of the connection that we have to animals. And I know it's something, we're looking for future guests on the podcast to get some kind of equine therapy and dog therapy, and just some people who are interested in that area, because we've got so much to learn and relearn. And it's, it's beautiful hearing about your call of your mountains. I'm always feeling a little bit homesick. My mountain home in Chamonix, I've not been to for 2 years. Oh, wow. And I've had an apartment there with my family for 20 years, and it's home. It's that guttural, intuitive feeling that you just, you can't really explain it, but just everything just aligns, like energetically, spiritually, emotionally, mentally, it just kind of falls into place. And when you're not there, you kind of feel like a little bit of fish out of water, however you kind of set your life up. So and just hearing you make that move as well, it's like a big step, like making that decision. I'm going to sell up, I'm going to move, let's see what happens. And it really leads into the name of your business, your coaching business, which you've got on the screen behind you again, Dare Greatly Coaching. You very much seem to be the, you're living, you're breathing, you're the epitome of your brand. So just, it would be great to get more of an insight into, what does it mean to you to dare greatly? And then how do you help your clients to do this?
When I never thought of myself as daring greatly. It's that other people have been telling me, well, you know, that is a really daring move or a courageous move. And sometimes when I tell the story or people don't know me very well, it sounds like I just suddenly did this, but it took me 4 years to get to the point where I was like, okay, now I have enough, I don't know, courage, or I have, you know, I'm just fed up with the way I'm living life. I want to change something. But what where the daring part comes in is, for me, when you know what your values are and when you know what what is really important to you, living in alignment with that is a daring exercise. That's, first of all, it's self-leadership, and self-leadership in and of itself is a daring exercise, because you always run into people who don't quite understand why you live your life the way you live your life, why you have principles. I remember a family member always told me, Gerdi, why are you so stubborn? And I was always like, I'm not being stubborn. I've got principles and I don't have them to just throw them out of the window the moment life gets a little bit more difficult. So what often happens is that people try to tell you, well, might make it easier on yourself, but what they're really saying is make it easier on us. So that's the self-leadership and the daring part that comes in. And I'm a big fan of history and certain kinds of history. And I read quite a lot about Teddy Roosevelt, where the daring greatly quote comes from. And I'm a big fan of Brené Brown's. Now, I haven't trained with Brené Brown. I'm always very clear on that. But so a couple of things came together when I had to think of a name for my business, and that's where Dare Greatly Coaching came from. And I might actually change it into Dare Greatly Guiding. I'm not quite sure yet, but it's coaching and guiding that I combine. So that's where the daring part came from, the Dare Greatly part.
I love listening. I'm loving hearing your story, because it's, as I said, there are things that echo with my husband and I, and we were the same. You know, we decided we wanted to move to Scotland, and a number of friends and family were just like, are you actually going to go and do it? And we're like, yeah, of course we are. You know, we've made a decision, and we're very similar to you, principled, and have our values. And I think most people said to me, you're going to be cold and you're going to be wet all the time. And interestingly, in the 3 years we've lived up here, we've had nicer weather than the majority of the United Kingdom pretty much the whole time, because we're on the West Coast, so it's a little bit nicer. But I think even though being cold and wet were two things that could happen, you have to balance up the benefits. And to be perfectly honest with you, I love walking in the rain, and I love the snow, and I actually love the crisp cold. So you sort of start to think about, well, those things might be negatives to other people, but actually for you, actually those things might tick all the right boxes. So I just love the fact that you dared greatly, and you moved yourself, and obviously followed your value system and your principles, and then helping your clients to dare greatly as well, I suppose. And we can see those people who can see you on the screen, and as Anna Marie said, for those who are listening, you've got your mountain range behind you there, and obviously you've talked a lot about the mountains, and I guess your coaching approach is to take people into those mountains to try and experience some of what you experienced yourself. So what is it about the mountains that, from a coaching perspective, helps your clients to just have that beneficial outdoor coaching experience? What is it that landscape brings to your clients?
I think what the mountains are, it's with any really grand, expensive, expensive, not as in dear, but as in big, and it's magnificence. What you realize when you're faced with mountains or with a desert, for example, or the ocean, is that we as humans are but a small part of what is living on this planet. It puts life and it puts our problems in a whole different perspective. When you're up on a mountain, you can literally look down on life and look down if you want to, if you want to see it, and if you can see it, you look down on your own life. And I think that's the biggest benefit that people get when they step out of their regular life and into experiences like that. You get to see that whatever seemed really huge while you were sitting at your desk or while you were at the office or at home isn't as big as you thought it was, and it isn't perhaps as big a problem as you thought it was. Sometimes taking a step back and taking a big step back, stepping into a completely different environment, enables you to see what the problem really is, and perhaps even see that it is not a problem at all. And what I experience myself, but what I see the people that come with me into the mountains also experience them, is that when they're able to see it and when they're willing to see it, is that nature mirrors stuff to us. And I had a client who always set herself goals that were almost impossible for her to reach. So when we were hiking towards a particular mountain on something that a regular or somebody who is reasonably fit would take perhaps 4 hours to get there. After 4 hours, we were not even halfway. So at some point, I as a guide had to say, I'm sorry, we're not going to make it. We have to turn around, which was crushing to her. But when she started thinking about what had happened here and what it was showing to her was that she almost always set the bar so high for herself that every time she was disappointed in not being able to reach it. So when we were a couple of days further on and we hiked towards another inn, we had the entire day, we took the entire day. It may have been a trek that I would have done in something like 3 hours and she did in 8, but she did it. She set herself a goal that was hard to get to, but she managed to do it. And, I offered to carry her backpack and stuff like that, but she was determined to reach that goal on her own merit and on her, by doing it all by herself and showing herself that she could do it. So those kinds of things happen in the mountains or in natural spaces that are this expansive, this magnificent, this big, in a way that I don't think could happen in the park around the corner. If that makes sense.
Of course. And this is almost the beauty of coaching outdoors and the different environments, and whether it is, the desert, the beach, the woodland, the mountain, there is so much variety. And actually, as coaches, what do we have an affinity? What are we drawn towards? And what do we really seek out that, centers and grounds us and really encourages, creative thoughts and, restoration? And, for you, it's the mountains, and you work, and I kind of use the term, and it's somewhat intangible, like, you work your magic in the mountains with your clients. And it would just be just insightful for our listeners just to dive a little bit more into, the benefits for your clients. And you've kindly shared one case study, and our listeners love to kind of have that fly on the wall kind of case studies. And whether it's a bit more about this kind of mirroring as well, nature mirroring life experience, if we open ourselves up to that. So just to get like a really rich flavor of your coaching.
I was thinking about this over the last couple of weeks, because like you, I often interview other coaches. And over the course, I realized that most coaches come to nature or come to coaching from a desire to be a coach first and foremost. And nature is it sounds a bit, I can't think of the word, but it's almost like it's a tool, and nature, and that doesn't do nature justice, but that's sometimes how people use it. For me, I came to coaching second, nature has always come first to me. So as I was guiding, I was having coaching conversations with people simply because it's much easier to get into really deep conversations quickly when you're just walking with people. And I wanted to have a solid base in that. So much of my coaching happens not necessarily with people that come to me first and foremost for the coaching, but first and foremost for the experience of having a hike. And then something happens that is connected to what is happening to them outside of this environment back home that sparks this conversation. And then we may have a couple of conversations over the course of a week when we're trekking together. So it's a bit of a different entrance point, say, to the whole coaching. And it's almost always something that has to do with them reconnecting to nature, to realizing once again, hang on, we're not humanity, or I as a person am not all encompassing, am not all important. There's other stuff going on in the world. I am part of something bigger. And then something happens, and that maybe I see them losing their balance in a almost an unnatural way almost, and starting a conversation about what is happening here. And that starts off a conversation about things that are happening in their life outside of this experience in the mountains. Or they themselves come to me and say, I just experienced something that showed me something about what is happening in my life back home. So it's those two things. Either one of those things happens, which when they're open to it, I'll have a conversation that is a coaching conversations with them. But I always let them decide whether or not they are happy to have that conversation.
One of the things that really sort of struck me when you were speaking then was this idea of getting, high up and having that perspective and looking down on things and understanding that it's, your perceptions change. And two things came to mind. One was a piece of research that I did last year, and one of the things that was spoken about with the coaches who'd had outdoor coaching was the fact that they like to get up on the top of a hill, and exactly that they experienced the expanse of the world, and saw themselves then more systemically as part of a much bigger world, and they could look down and they could really kind of put into perspective. And then as they walk back down the hill, they then put whatever challenges into an action plan. And it was just the action of physically walking up the hill to their challenge and then looking down on it and then walking off the hill to resolve it was very profound. And the other thing it reminded me of, I ran an event just recently, and one of our previous podcast guests, Kat Treblico, she came along and spoke, and she talked about, and her speech was called "The Business Benefits of Getting High," and it was absolutely brilliant. And it was all about get outside, get some height, get some perspective. Then you can look down on those challenges and really understand their place in the bigger world. And put that into perspective in a way that you can't indoors. So there was really, what you were talking about, it was really sparking those sort of thoughts and memories in my mind. And it also leads into the next question around, a lot of people who do outdoor coaching do walk in parks or walk along canals maybe, or walk maybe through fields or forests. But obviously there's a bit more to it if you're out in the mountains. So what kind of qualifications and expertise do you need to have to be able to do your kind of coaching that might be a little bit above and beyond just having a coaching qualification?
Yeah, there's actually in Austria, where I live, you do not have to have any qualification to bring people into the mountains, which I think is almost a dangerous thing. Because you have to know how to safely move among mountains, not just for yourself, but also how to bring another person safely into and out of the mountains again. And especially when you're doing work with a group. So there is this wonderful, there's wonderful coaching, not coaching, guide certifications that you can do. And you can do the International Mountain Leader training. And I know some people who've done that, which is a wonderful training. And in some areas, depending on what it is that you want to do, I think it even goes a little bit further than absolutely necessary. You can train with mountain associations like the Alpine clubs, or in Germany, and I think the UK has one, the Netherlands even has one. So there's basic stuff that you absolutely need to know. You need to know how to do first aid. You need to know how to read a map. You need to know how about the weather, those kinds of things. So it's just about how can I safely move among mountains? How can I be aware of the dangers without making them any bigger than they are? Because no environment is completely safe. And how can I also sort of gauge how fit my client is? People like the client I talked about in the example. They had told me about the things that they did back home to be in shape, but it turned out to be a different kind of being in shape than was needed to be comfortably moving among mountains. So there's that too. How do you gauge that? How do you gauge whether or not they're sure-footed, for example? Do I take them where I think of taking them, or do I take another route, and because that doesn't expose them to, I don't know, a very narrow ridge where they won't be able to go across, those kinds of things. So and it's not that you have to start there. I started with easy hikes, and slowly, I've lived in Austria now for 11 years. So I've graduated to what other people would call really difficult hikes, and which I by now think of as just a regular hike. But when I started, I thought them incredibly difficult too. So it's like with anything, you start easy and then you move on. But if you're only used to walking in a park around the corner and you've never walked among mountains, get some training, I would say. And start by yourself. Don't immediately start with bringing people into the mountains with yourself.
And it is such a key basis, looking after yourself, looking after your client.
Yeah.
What is your attitude to risk? And it all comes from our backgrounds. What's our knowledge? What's our experience? What's our skill set? And for me, I've worked within the expedition world. I've got my mountain leader. I've led expeditions 5,000 meter plus in the Himalayas, Morocco, Ecuador, and that's ingrained within me. And what I think of risk, what you think of risk, what Alex thinks of risk, we will all have different nuances. We'll all be comfortable in different places. And as our podcast gets more global, it's really important to know what are the rules and legislation within the country that you're working, so that actually you can make sure that you are covered. And for me, I always err on the side of caution. And it really is that frank conversation while you're onboarding a client at the beginning, just to make sure that actually, the physical side of things is covered. And there are questions there that you wouldn't cover with a client that potentially you're working with indoors. And, hands up, I've very much been in situations where I've had a client who's non-disclosed asthma, and it's not particularly helpful when you're walking up a hill and they start gasping and you're trying to have a bit of in-depth coaching conversation. So that it is very much a workaround, and we all kind of learn. So yeah, just the big takeaway is very much make sure that you've got the qualifications, yes, from the physical outdoor side, first aid, guiding, whatever's needed for the environment you're working in, and then your coaching as well. And just, it would be helpful to our listeners if you could just signpost any resources that you found, particularly helpful in your, journey so far, whether that is in relation to the safety side, the coaching side of things, and just, something potentially that just piques your interest.
Yeah, I know that Alex is very much into research, and I read some of the things that you wrote, but I must admit, I'm not into research at all. I'm very much of, I learn through stories. So when research is packaged in a good story, I'll remember it. If you just give me a book that is filled with a lot of research and data, I'm afraid I won't get through it. So, but there is this wonderful book when it comes to, I guess it's it's an overview of the research that has been done so far when it comes to the benefits of nature, and it's The Nature Fix by Florence Williams, which gives a wonderful overview. And from what I've read lately, yes, research and its results has gone a little bit further, but not that much has changed since Florence wrote that book. What has really inspired me lately are a couple of books that are much more about how, I think, about making us aware that we're part of nature and that we are not the only sentient beings around on this planet. And I think a lot of people have forgotten that. So I'm thinking about a book like Finding the Mother Tree by Suzanne Simard and Braiding Sweetgrass, and I always forget who wrote that, but I see you guys smiling, so I'm sure that you're familiar with it. And books by Peter Wohlleben, who is a German forester who wrote The Secret Life of Trees and other books around that subject. And I'm thinking also of another book that I have forgotten the title of, but it was by Joe Dispenza, who basically reminded me of the fact that the smallest particle of our human body at atom level or even smaller than that is exactly the same thing as that mountain that I walk over, or the tree that I look at, or the animals that live here. So once you start thinking about that thing and about the fact that everything is therefore moving because atoms always move, for me, that deeply connects me with nature, especially when I'm moving through it. As soon as I get into the urbanized world again, I lose that connection a little bit, but when I'm in nature, I'm always very aware of that. So those are a couple of things that help me, that reconnected me with nature, but also help me in the work that I do, which in a large part is all about reconnecting people with themselves through reconnecting them with nature.
There's some really lovely and really great resources there that you've shared. Some of them previous podcast guests have shared as well, and we're both nodding because we've read them and they're on our bookshelves, and we would highly recommend them as well. And as you said, you know, some of them are very research based and some of them aren't at all. Some of them are that story, and which is why we always ask our podcast guests to share stories with us as well, because people, just like you said, they remember stories and they remember insights through a story that somebody has told. And your link there as well with the fact that when we're outdoors and coaching, we're co-partnering with nature. We are part of nature. We are nature. And I think a lot of people see coaching outdoors, you use the outdoors as part of your coaching, whereas I think when you start to do it more, you evolve into realizing that you are part of nature and they are the coach. You know, nature is the coach. And we've had a number of guests who've echoed what you've said there as well. And it's just wonderful to hear people's coaching practice evolving into that sort of realization and that understanding of our place in the world as well, which is just fascinating. And I love what you said as well about particles and the fact that we're actually constantly moving and we are the same as the mountains and at a very sort of atomic level. I'm going to find that book that you mentioned and we'll share that on our resources page. So all of the resources that you've mentioned there that aren't already on the resources page, we will put up as well, because I'm sure that our listeners will be really keen to find out more. We're going to draw this to a close today. Honestly, we could talk to you so much, and we were saying before we actually started the recording today that we would love to talk to you again, because there's just so much to talk about and so much that you could share with us, so many amazing stories, and you know, just getting even more in depth about the experience and the benefits of the kind of outdoors that you work in. We would love to know more. But for our listeners, would you be able to signpost where they can find you in the world of social media and websites, etc.? Because I'm absolutely certain that people are going to want to connect with you after they've listened to today's podcast.
Yeah, of course. Well, thank you for your kind words, by the way. But people can find me at theregreatlycoaching.com. I'm on Instagram with the same name, or They're Greatly Coaching altogether. And I'm on LinkedIn, and that's going to be a harder one because that's Gerdi Verwoert. So, but I'm sure you'll put the link in the show notes somewhere. So yeah, that's where you can find me most of the time, on LinkedIn and on Instagram. And I have a podcast like you do, and that is also, you can find that through my website. So yeah.
Yes, and we will make sure we add all of those links onto our webpage, and when we share the podcast on LinkedIn. And yes, and you know, I highly recommend following Gerdi on LinkedIn, because there's so much that you share and so many insights and wonderful experiences. And I see your photos, and I'm just like, oh, it just looks amazing.
And I just remembered, for those people that have never hiked mountains but want to learn how to hike it safely, there is an old podcast series of mine also on my website, which is all about hiking mountains safely. So,
and that's wonderful. I'm a low-level hiker, especially in Scottish terms, but that's my aspiration over the next few years, is to get myself up right into the Munros and beyond, up into the thousands and thousands of.
Well, you're living there, so you'll get there.
Ben Nevis is on my list for next year. But thank you so much for today. Honestly, yeah, it's been wonderful listening to your insights and your stories that you've shared with us, and the experiences that you've had. And hopefully our listeners will follow you and connect with you on social media as well. So for the other podcasts that we have, our other guests, I'm sure hopefully people know by now, but our website is www.coaching-outdoors.com, and Gerdis podcast will be on there along with all of our others. So thank you so much for today, and we will look forward to hopefully speaking to you again.
Thank you.
So if you enjoyed what you've heard,
Like it,
share across your network,
and subscribe to our YouTube channel and LinkedIn community page, the Coaching Outdoor Podcast.
thanks so much in advance for your support.